Ethan Carter had always been a man of routine. Every evening after finishing work at the garage, he would grab a thermos of coffee and head to the edge of Willow Lake, just outside his small Montana town. The lake was quiet, surrounded by tall pine trees that swayed gently in the breeze. It was his favorite place to sit and think, far from the noise of people and engines. Tonight, however, something unusual caught his attention. As Ethan settled onto the weathered wooden bench overlooking the water, he noticed a strange glow in the sky. At first, he thought it might be a meteor shower, something he'd seen before during long nights outdoors. But this light was different. Instead of streaking across the horizon like meteors usually did, it seemed to pulse and flicker erratically. Squinting, Ethan realized it wasn't moving smoothly through the air. It was falling fast, almost as if it were spiraling out of control. Curiosity tugged at him. He stood up, leaving his thermos behind, and walked closer to the edge of the lake for a better view. That's when he saw a figure tumbling through the atmosphere. Not debris or rock, but a person. A very real, living being hurtling toward Earth with alarming speed. For a moment, Ethan froze, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Then instinct kicked in. Without thinking twice, Ethan sprinted toward where the figure would likely land. His boots pounded against the dirt path as adrenaline coursed through his veins. He didn't know who or what was falling from the sky, but he couldn't let them crash into the ground unprotected. Branches whipped past his face as he pushed deeper into the woods surrounding the lake. Guided only by the fiery trail above him, the figure grew larger as it neared the surface, and Ethan could now see faint details. Long silvery hair streamed behind her, catching the moonlight like threads of spun glass. Her body twisted and turned helplessly as gravity pulled her downward. She looked human, yet there was something otherworldly about her presence, the way she shimmered faintly even amidst the chaos of descent. Time slowed down as Ethan calculated his next move. He positioned himself beneath her trajectory, arms outstretched, bracing for impact. Just seconds before she hit the earth, he leaped forward with all his strength, colliding midair with the mysterious woman. They landed hard on the soft forest floor, cushioned slightly by leaves and moss. For a few moments, Ethan lay there, winded and stunned. His chest burned from the effort, and his ears rang from the sudden silence that followed the commotion. Slowly, he rolled off the woman and sat up, coughing as he tried to catch his breath. Turning to check on her, he froze. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen. Her skin glowed faintly, as though lit from within, and her eyes, wide open now, were a luminous shade of violet. They stared at him with an intensity that made his heart race. She wore a flowing garment that seemed woven from liquid metal, shifting colors with every slight movement. Despite her ethereal appearance, she appeared fragile, her slender frame trembling slightly as she took shallow breaths. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He knew she probably wouldn't understand him, but the question felt necessary anyway. The woman blinked slowly, then raised a trembling hand toward him. Her lips parted, and a series of melodic sounds escaped them, soft musical tones that didn't match any language Ethan recognized. Still, her expression conveyed gratitude. She nodded faintly, as if to acknowledge his role in saving her life. Ethan glanced around nervously, half expecting others to appear. Whoever or whatever she was, she hadn't fallen alone. Something had sent her plummeting to earth, and he doubted it was an accident. Yet, here they were, alone in the middle of the woods, with nothing but the rustling leaves and distant hoots of owls for company. Carefully, Ethan helped the woman sit up. She winced but didn't resist as he supported her weight. Up close, he noticed the intricate patterns etched into her skin-delicate swirls and symbols that seemed to shift and change as he watched. It was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic. He shook his head slightly, forcing himself to focus. "I should get you somewhere safe," he said, speaking more to himself than to her. "You can't stay out here." She tilted her head, studying him intently. Though she couldn't understand his words, her gaze suggested she trusted him, or at least hoped she could. With some effort, Ethan managed to lift her to her feet. She leaned heavily on him, clearly weakened by the fall. Together, they began making their way back toward his cabin, which was less than a mile away. The journey was slow and awkward, with Ethan doing most of the work. Every step seemed to sap what little energy the woman had left. By the time they reached the clearing where Ethan's cabin stood, she was practically unconscious again. He carried her inside and laid her gently on the couch, covering her with a blanket to ward off the chill. Standing over her, Ethan felt a mix of awe and unease. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why had she fallen from the sky? These questions swirled in his mind as he fetched a damp cloth to clean the dirt and scratches from her face. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just changed forever. Outside, the night remained eerily calm, but Ethan knew it wouldn't last. Whatever forces had brought this woman to Earth weren't done yet, and neither was he. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the cracks in the wooden walls of Ethan's cabin, casting golden patterns across the floor. Ethan sat at his kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee as he watched the mysterious woman sleep on the couch. Her breathing was steady now, and some color had returned to her shimmering skin. She looked peaceful, almost serene, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that trouble was lurking just around the corner. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was too early for anyone else in town to be awake. The quiet gave him time to think, though his thoughts kept circling back to the same questions. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why had she fallen from the sky? He knew she wasn't human, not entirely, but beyond that, he had no answers. Still, something about her presence felt familiar, as if she carried a piece of the universe with her that resonated deep within him. After finishing his coffee, Ethan decided to check on her again. She stirred slightly as he approached, her violet eyes fluttering open. For a moment, she looked confused, unsure of where she was. Then recognition dawned, and she offered him a small, grateful smile. Ethan pointed to himself and said, "Ethan," hoping she might understand or mimic him. She tilted her head, studying him intently. After a pause, she placed a hand over her chest and spoke a single word in her melodic language. It sounded like Leora. Ethan repeated it slowly, testing the syllables on his tongue. She nodded, her smile widening ever so slightly. Leora, that would do for now. Encouraged by their progress, Ethan gestured toward the window, pointing upward to indicate the sky. He mimed falling, trying to ask how she had ended up here. Leora's expression darkened, and she hesitated before responding. She raised both hands, palms facing each other, and moved them apart violently, as if tearing something in two. Then she pointed to herself and made a pushing motion, signaling that someone or something had thrown her. Ethan frowned, piecing together what little he could from her gestures. Someone hadn't wanted her around anymore. They had cast her out? But who? And why? Before he could press further, Leora leaned forward and grabbed his wrist gently. She pointed toward the door, then shook her head firmly, warning him not to go outside. Ethan nodded, understanding that danger might still be nearby. Over the next few hours, Ethan tried to make Leora comfortable while keeping an eye on the surrounding woods. He brought her water and food, though she didn't seem interested in eating. Instead, she focused on communicating. Using sticks and dirt on the floor, she began drawing symbols, complex shapes that resembled constellations or circuits. Ethan watched in fascination, unable to decipher their meaning, but recognizing their importance. As the day wore on, Leora grew stronger. She started experimenting with her surroundings, touching objects, and murmuring softly under her breath. At one point, she picked up a metal spoon and held it close to her face. A faint hum filled the room, and the spoon glowed briefly before returning to normal. Ethan stared, wide-eyed, unsure whether to be amazed or frightened. Despite these strange occurrences, Leora remained gentle and calm. She seemed genuinely curious about everything around her, examining books, tools, and even Ethan's old radio with childlike wonder. Yet there was an underlying sadness in her demeanor. As if she carried a heavy burden she couldn't share. By late afternoon, Ethan realized he needed help. He couldn't keep Leora hidden forever, especially if whatever had sent her here came looking for her. Reluctantly, he left the cabin and drove into town, heading straight for Claire Bennett's house. Claire was a journalist who worked for the local paper, known for her sharp mind and insatiable curiosity. If anyone could help him figure out what was going on, it was her. When Ethan arrived, Claire greeted him with a mix of surprise and suspicion. "What brings you here?" she asked, leaning against her doorway. "You're not usually the type to drop by unannounced." "I need your help," Ethan said quickly, lowering his voice. "Something unusual happened last night. I don't know how to explain it, but I think it's big, really big." Claire crossed her arms, raising an eyebrow. "Unusual? Like what?" Ethan hesitated, then decided honesty was his best option. "I found someone, or rather, they fell out of the sky. Literally. She's not human exactly, and I think she's in trouble." For a moment, Claire just stared at him, clearly skeptical. Then she sighed and stepped aside, motioning for him to come in. "Okay, start talking, from the beginning." Back at the cabin, Leora waited patiently, occasionally glancing toward the door. When Ethan finally returned with Claire, her eyes widened with interest and perhaps a hint of apprehension. Claire froze in the doorway, taking in the sight of the glowing-skinned woman sitting calmly on the couch. "Oh my God," she whispered, clutching the frame for support. "Is this some kind of prank?" "It's real," Ethan assured her, closing the door behind him. "Her name is Leora. She doesn't speak our language, but she's been trying to communicate." Claire approached cautiously, her reporter instincts kicking in. "Can she understand us?" Ethan shrugged. "Maybe partially. She gets the gist." "Of things?" Leora watched Claire closely, tilting her head as if assessing her intentions. Finally, she reached out a hand, palm up, in a gesture of peace. Claire hesitated, then placed her own hand in Leora's. The contact lasted only a second, but it seemed to satisfy both women. Over the next hour, Ethan and Claire worked together to learn more about Leora. With Claire's help, they refined their attempts at communication using drawings and simple gestures. Leora sketched scenes of stars and ships, hinting at a vast universe far beyond Earth. She also drew a symbol that looked like a crown, pointing to herself and then shaking her head sadly. It was clear she held or once held a position of power. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Claire turned to Ethan, her expression serious. "This changes everything," she said quietly. "If what you're saying is true, and I'm starting to believe it is, then we're dealing with something way bigger than either of us. We need to figure out who she is, where she came from, and why she's here. And we need to do it fast." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. He glanced at Leora, who was watching them with a mixture of hope and fear. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain: their lives would never be the same again. The days that followed were a blur of discovery and tension. Ethan and Claire worked tirelessly to learn more about Leora, piecing together fragments of her story through gestures, drawings, and occasional flashes of understanding. The cabin became their makeshift headquarters, cluttered with sketches, notes, and maps spread across every available surface. Despite the mounting questions, one thing was clear: Leora's arrival had set something in motion, something dangerous. Leora seemed eager to share what she could, using her limited means of communication to convey urgency. She often pointed upward, drawing symbols of ships and stars on scraps of paper. Sometimes she would sketch scenes of conflict figures clashing, weapons firing, explosions lighting up the darkness. It was as if she were trying to warn them about a looming threat. But without a shared language, the details remained frustratingly vague. Claire spent hours researching online, digging into reports of UFO sightings and unexplained phenomena. She discovered that several people in nearby towns had reported strange lights in the sky around the same time Leora had fallen. Some claimed to have seen a massive object hovering high above the mountains, its shape shifting like liquid metal. Others described eerie hums and vibrations that rattled windows and shook the ground. These accounts matched Leora's descriptions of her ship, or at least part of it. One evening, as Ethan prepared dinner, Claire leaned over the table, tapping a printed article with her finger. "Look at this," she said, sliding the paper toward him. "There's been increased activity near the orbit where Leora says her ship is. Scientists are calling it an unidentified celestial object." Ethan frowned, scanning the text. "Do you think it's still looking for her?" "It's possible," Claire replied, glancing at Leora, who sat quietly nearby, watching them intently. "If she was exiled, they might want to make sure she doesn't survive." The thought sent a chill down Ethan's spine. He turned to Leora, pointing to the article and miming a search. "Are they coming for you?" he asked, though he knew she wouldn't fully understand. Leora nodded solemnly, her violet eyes clouded with worry. She placed a hand over her heart, then made a slashing motion across her throat, a universal sign of danger. Ethan exchanged a glance with Claire. They both understood the stakes now. Keeping Leora hidden wasn't just about protecting her. It was about keeping themselves safe too. Despite the growing sense of unease, life in the cabin continued in its own quiet rhythm. Leora adapted quickly, showing an uncanny ability to grasp human customs. She learned to use utensils, drink from cups, and even flip through the pages of books, though the words meant nothing to her. Her presence brought an odd sort of magic to the small space, filling it with soft glows and faint hums whenever she touched certain objects. Ethan found himself fascinated by her, not just because of her alien nature, but because of her kindness and resilience. Beneath her shimmering exterior, she seemed deeply human, or perhaps humanity itself was more universal than he'd ever imagined. But the peace couldn't last forever. One night, as the three of them sat around the table sharing a meal, the lights in the cabin flickered unexpectedly. At first, Ethan assumed it was a power surge caused by the old wiring. But when the flickering grew more intense, accompanied by a low resonant hum, he knew something was wrong. Leora stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Her eyes darted toward the window, glowing brighter with each passing second. Outside, the forest was bathed in an unnatural blue light, pulsating like a heartbeat. Claire rushed to the window, pulling back the curtain slightly to peer outside. What she saw made her gasp. "Ethan?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "There's something out there." Ethan joined her, peering cautiously through the glass. In the clearing beyond the trees, three figures stood motionless, their forms humanoid yet distinctly alien. Their bodies were encased in sleek armor that reflected the moonlight, giving them an almost ghostly appearance. They carried devices that emitted the same blue glow illuminating the woods, and their heads tilted unnaturally as they scanned the area. "They found us," Claire breathed, stepping back instinctively. Leora moved to stand between them, her expression fierce despite her earlier fragility. She raised her hands, palms outward, and began speaking rapidly in her melodic tongue. The sound filled the room, vibrating through the air like a song. Ethan felt his skin prickle, and the hair on the back of his neck stood on end. Whatever she was doing, it was powerful, and it got the attention of the figures outside. One of the armored beings lifted its device, aiming it directly at the cabin. A beam of light shot through the window, narrowly missing Ethan as he dove for cover. Glass shattered, scattering shards across the floor. Claire screamed, ducking behind the couch as another blast hit the wall, leaving a scorched mark. "We need to get out of here!" Ethan shouted, grabbing Leora's arm. She resisted at first, shaking her head firmly and gesturing for them to stay put. But when a third blast struck the doorframe, sending splinters flying, she relented, allowing Ethan to pull her toward the back exit. Claire scrambled after them, clutching a flashlight as they fled into the woods. The cold night air bit at their faces as they ran, dodging tree roots and rocks underfoot. Behind them, the hum grew louder, accompanied by heavy footsteps crunching through the underbrush. The figures were following them, moving with unnatural speed and precision. Ethan led the group deeper into the forest, relying on his knowledge of the terrain to evade their pursuers. He remembered an old hunting cabin a few miles away, hidden deep enough in the wilderness that no one would think to look for them there. It was their best chance. As they ran, Leora suddenly stopped, turning to face the direction they had come from. Her eyes blazed with determination, and she raised her hands again, this time forming intricate patterns in the air. A ripple of energy surged outward, creating a barrier of light that momentarily halted their pursuers. The armored figures hesitated, their movements jerky as if struggling against an invisible force. "Keep going," Leora urged, though her words were still incomprehensible. Ethan didn't need translation to understand her meaning. He grabbed her hand and pulled her along, urging Claire to keep moving as well. They reached the hunting cabin just as dawn began to break, slipping inside and barricading the door with whatever furniture they could find. Exhausted and shaken, they collapsed onto the dusty floor, listening for any sign of pursuit. For now, at least, they were safe. But as Ethan caught his breath, he realized the truth. Running wouldn't solve anything. Sooner or later, they would have to confront whoever or whatever was after Leora. And when that time came, they would need more than luck on their side. The hunting cabin was small and cramped, its wooden walls lined with cobwebs and dust. The air smelled of damp earth and old wood, a stark contrast to the fresh scent of pine outside. Ethan, Claire, and Leora huddled together in silence, listening intently for any sounds of pursuit. For now, the forest remained quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the morning breeze. But none of them believed the calm would last. Leora sat cross-legged on the floor, her glowing skin casting faint shadows on the walls. She appeared deep in thought, her violet eyes closed as if she were concentrating. Every so often, her hands moved slightly, tracing invisible patterns in the air. Ethan watched her curiously, but didn't interrupt. Whatever she was doing seemed important, and possibly their only hope of staying alive. Claire paced back and forth, her mind racing. "We can't stay here forever," she muttered, glancing toward the boarded-up windows. "They'll find us eventually." Ethan nodded, rubbing his temples. "I know, but we're not ready to face them yet. We need a plan." "A plan?" Claire shot him a skeptical look. "Against those things? Do you even know what they are?" "No," Ethan admitted. "But I do know one thing. They're after Leora. If we want to survive this, we have to figure out why." Claire sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Fine. Let's start with what we know. Leora fell from their ship, probably against her will. She's been trying to warn us about them since the beginning, and now they've tracked her down. So either they're here to take her back, or they're here to kill her." Ethan glanced at Leora, who had opened her eyes and was watching them closely. "Which is it, do you think?" he asked softly, directing the question more to himself than to anyone else. Leora hesitated, then pointed to herself, and mind being thrown again. She followed this with a slashing motion across her throat, the same gesture she'd used before to indicate danger. It was clear. If they captured her, she wouldn't survive. Claire knelt beside her, speaking gently. "Okay, so they're not coming to rescue you. That means we need to protect you and ourselves at all costs." Leora nodded, her expression grim. Then she reached out and touched Claire's arm lightly. A soft hum filled the room, and Claire gasped, pulling her hand away instinctively. But instead of fear, she looked intrigued. "Did you feel that?" she asked Ethan. "It was like warmth, like energy." Ethan frowned. "What did you do?" "I'm not sure," Claire replied, turning to Leora. "But whatever it was, it felt safe, like she was trying to show me something." Leora smiled faintly, placing her hands over her chest and then extending them outward as if offering a gift. Ethan and Claire exchanged puzzled glances, but decided not to press further. There was no time for explanations, not when their pursuers could return at any moment. Later that afternoon, Claire ventured outside to gather firewood while Ethan stayed behind to keep watch. He sat near the window, peering through a crack. Between the boards, the forest was eerily still, as though holding its breath. Even the birds had gone silent. Something about the atmosphere made his skin crawl. Inside, Leora continued her quiet meditation, her movements slow and deliberate. Ethan couldn't help but admire her composure. Despite everything, she remained calm, almost serene. It was as if she carried an inner strength that transcended fear, a quality he wished he possessed. "Do you trust us?" Ethan asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Leora turned to him, tilting her head slightly. He pointed to himself and Claire, then placed a hand over his heart. "Trust?" Leora studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. She mirrored his gesture, placing her own hand over her chest. It wasn't much, but it meant something. They were allies now, bound by circumstance and mutual survival. When Claire returned, she carried not only firewood, but also a stack of papers she had scribbled on during her walk. "I've been thinking," she said, spreading the notes across the floor. "If Leora's people are advanced enough to travel through space, they must have technology we can't even imagine. But maybe, just maybe, we can use that against them." "How?" Ethan asked, leaning forward. "Think about it. Leora has abilities too. She's created barriers, manipulated energy, and communicated without words. What if she can do more? What if she can disable their weapons or disrupt their systems somehow?" Ethan glanced at Leora, who seemed to understand the gist of the conversation. She nodded slowly, raising her hands and forming a small orb of light between her palms. The glow pulsed steadily, growing brighter with each passing second. "That's incredible," Claire whispered, awestruck. "But how do we harness that? How do we fight back?" "We don't," Ethan said firmly. "Not directly, anyway. Our best chance is to get her somewhere safe, to someone who can help her. Someone who knows more about all of this." Claire frowned. "And who exactly is that? The government? Scientists? Do you really think handing her over is the answer?" "No," Ethan admitted. "But there has to be someone out there, someone watching, studying. Maybe they've seen her kind before." Leora interrupted their discussion by pointing to the ceiling, then drawing a quick sketch in the dirt. It was a map of stars, with one constellation circled prominently. She tapped the circle repeatedly, her urgency unmistakable. "She's telling us where to go," Claire realized. "That's her home, or at least where she thinks help might be." Ethan nodded, feeling a spark of hope for the first time in days. "Then that's our next move. We find a way to send a signal to whoever or whatever is out there." The trio spent the rest of the day preparing for their journey. Claire used her phone to research nearby observatories, hoping to locate equipment powerful enough to transmit a message into space. Meanwhile, Ethan scavenged supplies from the cabin, packing food, water, and basic tools into a backpack. Leora assisted where she could, using her abilities to repair broken items and reinforce the cabin's defenses in case they needed to return as night fell. They set out under the cover of darkness, guided by the constellations above. The forest was cold and silent, the moonlight filtering through the trees in pale beams. Each step felt heavy with anticipation, as though the world itself was waiting to see what would happen next. They traveled for hours, moving cautiously to avoid detection. When they finally reached the observatory, an old, abandoned structure, perched on a hilltop relief, washed over them. The building was run down but functional, its massive telescope still intact. Claire immediately got to work, setting up the equipment while Ethan and Leora kept watch by dawn. They had crafted a simple message, coordinates, symbols, and a plea for assistance. Using the telescope's transmitter, they sent the signal into the cosmos, unsure if anyone or anything would receive it. Exhausted but hopeful, they collapsed onto the floor, staring up at the stars. For the first time in days, Ethan allowed himself to believe they might actually make it. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as unlikely allies united by fate and determination. The observatory was quiet, its ancient walls holding the weight of countless nights spent gazing at the stars. The air smelled faintly of rust and dust, a testament to years of neglect. Outside, the horizon glowed with the first light of dawn, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Inside, Ethan, Claire, and Leora sat in silence, their bodies weary but their minds alert. They had sent their message into the void, a desperate cry for help that might never be answered. Now all they could do was wait and hope. Ethan leaned against the telescope, his eyes scanning the darkened corners of the room. The equipment hummed softly, a comforting sound amidst the uncertainty. He glanced at Claire, who was busy sketching. New notes on a pad of paper, her pen moving quickly across the page. Her focus was unwavering, as if writing down every detail would somehow make sense of the chaos. Beside her, Leora sat cross-legged on the floor, her hands resting gently on her knees. She looked peaceful, almost meditative, but Ethan could see the tension in her posture. She knew, just as they did, that danger hadn't passed it, was only delayed. "We should get some rest," Ethan said finally, breaking the silence. "We're no good to anyone if we're exhausted." Claire nodded without looking up. "You're right, but someone needs to keep watch." "I'll take the first shift," Ethan offered. "You two try to sleep." Leora tilted her head, studying him with her luminous violet eyes. She placed a hand over her chest, then pointed to Ethan, mimicking his earlier gesture of trust. It was clear she didn't want to leave him alone, even for a moment. Ethan smiled faintly, touched by her concern. "It's okay," he reassured her. "I'll wake you if anything happens." Reluctantly, Leora agreed, lying down on the dusty floor and wrapping herself in a blanket Claire had brought from the cabin. Claire followed suit, curling up nearby. Within minutes, both women were asleep, their breathing slow and steady. Ethan watched them for a moment, feeling a surge of protectiveness. Whatever came next, he vowed to keep them safe. Hours passed uneventfully. The sun rose higher in the sky, casting long shadows through the observatory's cracked windows. Ethan paced the room, checking the telescope periodically to ensure it remained operational. He wasn't sure how long it would take for their message to reach its intended audience, or if it ever would, but he refused to give up hope. Somewhere out there, someone had to be listening, just as Ethan began to think the day might pass. Without incident, a low rumble echoed through the hills. At first, he thought it was thunder, though the sky remained clear and blue. Then the ground beneath his feet vibrated, sending a jolt of alarm through his body. He rushed to the window. Peering outside in the distance, a massive ship descended from the clouds, its sleek metallic surface gleaming in the sunlight. It hovered silently above the trees, radiating an aura of power and menace. Ethan's heart sank. They had found them. "Claire! Leora!" he whispered urgently, shaking them awake. Both women stirred instantly, their instincts sharp despite their fatigue. Claire scrambled to her feet, while Leora stood calmly, her eyes fixed on the ship outside. "They're here," Claire said, her voice tight with fear. "What do we do?" Ethan grabbed the backpack they had brought, stuffing their few remaining supplies inside. "We need to move." Now, Leora shook her head firmly, stepping between them and the door. She raised her hands, forming a glowing barrier similar to the one she had created in the forest. The energy pulsed brightly, filling the room with warmth. Ethan hesitated, unsure whether to argue or trust her judgment. "They're not here for us," Claire murmured, watching Leora closely. "They're here for her." As if on cue, the ship emitted a beam of light that cut through the roof of the observatory. Dust and debris rained down as several figures materialized inside, clad in the same sleek armor they had seen before. Their movements were fluid, yet mechanical, their faces obscured behind reflective visors. One of them stepped forward, raising a device that emitted a high-pitched whine. Leora stepped forward, her voice rising in a melodic chant. The sound resonated through the room, causing the figures to pause. For a brief moment, it seemed as though she might hold them off. But then the leader of the group spoke, his tone cold and commanding. Though his words were incomprehensible, their meaning was clear: surrender or face destruction. Ethan clenched his fist, anger bubbling beneath his skin. "We can't let them take her," he growled. Claire grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "We don't have a choice. Look at them. They're armed. We're outnumbered." Leora turned to face them, her expression resolute. She placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, then on Claire's, conveying gratitude and understanding. Then she stepped toward the armored figures, lowering her hands in a gesture of submission. Ethan wanted to protest, to fight, but he knew Claire was right. There was nothing they could do not without getting themselves killed. The figures surrounded Leora, binding her wrists with glowing cuffs that seemed to sap her strength. As they led her away, she glanced back one last time, her eyes locking onto Ethan's. In that moment, he saw not fear, but resolve. She was ready to face whatever awaited her, even if it meant sacrificing herself. Once the ship had vanished into the sky, Ethan and Claire collapsed onto the floor, overwhelmed by exhaustion and despair. The observatory felt empty now, its silence oppressive. Claire buried her face in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. Ethan stared blankly at the ceiling, replaying the events in his mind. He had failed. They had failed. But then Claire spoke, her voice trembling but determined. "We can't give up. Not yet." Ethan looked at her, startled. "What are you talking about?" "There's nothing left to do." "Yes, there is," Claire insisted. "We sent a message, remember? Someone or something is out there. If Leora has allies, they'll come for her. And when they do, we need to be ready." Ethan considered her words, feeling a flicker of hope reignite within him. She was right. Giving up wasn't an option, not while Leora still needed them. Slowly he nodded, rising to his feet. "Okay," he said. "Let's find a way to help her, no matter what it takes." The days that followed were some of the hardest Ethan and Claire had ever faced. After Leora's capture, they returned to the cabin, their spirits heavy with guilt and helplessness. The small wooden structure felt emptier than before, as if her absence had left a void that couldn't be filled. Yet they refused to give in to despair. They clung to the hope that their message would reach someone. Anyone who could help. Claire spent most of her time researching online, scouring forums and databases for any mention of alien encounters or unidentified spacecraft. Her laptop became her constant companion, its screen casting a pale glow on her face late into the night. She found fragments of information reports of strange lights, unexplained disappearances, and cryptic messages intercepted by amateur radio enthusiasts. But nothing concrete. Still, she persisted, determined to piece together clues that might lead them to Leora. Ethan, meanwhile, focused on practical matters. He fortified the cabin, reinforcing the doors and windows with whatever materials he could find. He also scavenged supplies from nearby towns, knowing they might need to leave at a moment's notice. Despite his efforts to stay busy, his mind often wandered back to Leora. He remembered her kindness, her quiet strength, and the way she had trusted them even when it cost her everything. The thought of her trapped aboard that ship filled him with anger and resolve. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Claire burst into the cabin, her eyes wide with excitement. "I think I found something," she said breathlessly, holding up her laptop. "There's been chatter about a second ship spotted near Earth's orbit. It's smaller than the one we saw, but people are saying it's been sending signals." Ethan frowned, leaning closer to look at the screen. "What kind of signals?" "Not sure yet," Claire admitted. "But they're different from anything humans have sent. Could it be a response to our message? It's possible, Ethan replied, feeling a flicker of hope. If it is, we need to figure out how to make contact. Leora's earlier demonstration of energy manipulation gave them an idea. Perhaps they could replicate her methods using simple tools. Claire suggested building a device that could amplify electromagnetic waves, hoping it might catch the attention of whoever or whatever was monitoring Earth. Ethan, though skeptical, agreed to try. Together, they gathered wires, batteries, and spare parts from the garage, piecing together a crude transmitter dot as they worked. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Every hour Leora spent aboard that ship was another hour she might be in danger. He pushed himself harder, working late into the night until his hands were raw and his eyes burned with exhaustion. Claire matched his determination, refusing to rest until the device was complete. Finally, after 2 sleepless days, they stood in the clearing outside the cabin, their makeshift transmitter powered up and ready. Claire adjusted the frequency while Ethan aimed the antenna skyward, hoping against hope that their signal would reach its target. For several tense minutes, nothing happened. Then, a faint hum filled the air, growing louder and more distinct. Above them, the stars seemed to shimmer, as if responding to their call. And then it came a beam of light descending from the heavens, illuminating the forest like daylight. A small ship hovered silently above the trees, its design sleek and unfamiliar. Unlike the menacing vessel that had taken Leora, this one radiated a sense of peace. Its surface glowed softly, pulsating with colors that shifted like liquid rainbows. Ethan and Claire exchanged astonished looks, their hearts racing. This wasn't their chance to save Leora, but as the ship lowered itself into the clearing, uncertainty crept in. Who or what was aboard? Were they allies, or simply another faction seeking control? A hatch opened, and a figure emerged. It was humanoid, taller than Ethan, with skin that shimmered like starlight. Its features were delicate yet striking, and its eyes glowed with the same violet hue as Leora's. The being moved gracefully, stopping a few feet away from them. It spoke in a melodic voice, the words flowing like music. Though neither Ethan nor Claire understood the language, they recognized the tone, calm, reassuring, and curious. Claire stepped forward cautiously, raising her hands in a gesture of peace. "We mean no harm," she said, enunciating each word clearly. "We're here because of Leora." At the mention of her name, the figure's expression softened. It nodded slowly, placing a hand over its chest and mimicking the gesture Leora had used to convey trust. Ethan took this as a sign of goodwill and stepped forward as well. "She helped us," he explained, pointing to himself and Claire. "Now, we want to help her." The being tilted its head, studying them intently. Then it raised a slender arm, gesturing toward the ship. Ethan hesitated, unsure whether to follow. Claire nudged him gently. "We don't have a choice," she whispered. "This is our only shot." With a deep breath, Ethan nodded. Together, they climbed aboard the ship, their hearts pounding with anticipation. Inside, the interior was unlike anything they had ever seen. The walls seemed alive, shifting and glowing with patterns that pulsed in rhythm with their footsteps. There were no visible controls or seats, just smooth surfaces that responded to touch. The being led them to a central chamber, where holographic images floated in midair. One image showed Leora, bound and surrounded by armored figures. Another depicted the larger ship, its ominous presence dominating the display. The being pointed to the images, then to Ethan and Claire, as if asking for confirmation. "Yes," Ethan said firmly. "That's her. That's where she is." The being nodded again, its expression turning grim. It touched a panel on the wall, and the ship vibrated slightly as it began to move. Ethan and Claire exchanged nervous glances, realizing they were now part of something much bigger than themselves. They didn't know what awaited them, but they were ready to face it for Leora's sake. As the ship ascended into the sky, leaving Earth behind, Ethan gazed out a window at the shrinking planet below. For the first time in his life, he felt truly connected to the universe, aware of how vast and mysterious it truly was. And somewhere out there, amidst the stars, Leora waited for rescue, for justice, and for the chance to reclaim her freedom. The journey through space was unlike anything Ethan and Claire had ever experienced. The ship moved silently, gliding through the void with a grace that defied logic. Outside the windows, stars streaked past like rivers of light, their brilliance blinding yet mesmerizing. Inside, the air hummed softly, carrying an energy that felt alive. As if the vessel itself were breathing alongside them, Dot, Ethan, and Claire sat side by side, their hands gripping the smooth edges of their seats. Neither spoke. Words seemed unnecessary in the face of such awe-inspiring beauty. Yet beneath their wonder lay a deep sense of unease. They didn't know what awaited them when they reached the larger ship or whether they would even survive the encounter. All they could do was trust the being who had brought them here and hope it shared their desire to help Leora. After what felt like hours but could have been mere minutes, the ship slowed, approaching a massive structure suspended in the darkness. It was the same vessel that had taken Leora a hulking, metallic monstrosity bristling with weapons and glowing with ominous red lights. The sight filled Ethan with dread, but he forced himself to stay calm. They had come this far, they couldn't turn back now. Their guide gestured for them to follow as the ship docked within a cavernous hangar bay. "Stepping off the vessel, Ethan." And Claire found themselves surrounded by towering walls of shimmering metal. The air was cold and sterile, devoid of the warmth they had felt aboard the smaller ship. A group of armored figures emerged from the shadows, their movements mechanical and deliberate. They carried weapons that crackled with energy, aimed squarely at the newcomers. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm Ethan. He glanced at Claire, whose face was pale but resolute. Then their guide stepped forward, raising a hand in a calming gesture. The armored figures hesitated, lowering their weapons slightly. Clearly, their rescuer held some authority here, though whether it was enough remained to be seen. They were led through winding corridors, their footsteps echoing against the polished floors. The walls were lined with screens displaying complex data streams, though neither Ethan nor Claire could decipher their meaning. Eventually, they arrived at a large chamber dominated by a raised platform. Standing atop it was a figure clad in ornate armor, its design more intricate than the others. This was clearly someone important to leader, perhaps. Their guide addressed. The figure in the melodic language, speaking quickly and urgently. The leader listened intently, its expression unreadable behind the reflective visor. When the speech ended, the leader turned its gaze toward Ethan and Claire, studying them with unnerving intensity. Then it spoke, its voice deeper and harsher than the others, though still melodic. Though the words meant nothing to Ethan and Claire, their guide translated gestures into simple explanations. The leader wanted to know why humans had interfered in matters not their own. Why had they risked so much for one of their kind? Claire stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "We didn't know she was one of you," she said slowly, emphasizing each word. "All we knew was that she needed help and that your people hurt her." The leader tilted its head, considering her response. Then it motioned for them to follow. They were led to another chamber, smaller and dimly lit. In the center stood Leora, her wrists still bound by glowing cuffs. Her skin had lost much of its luster, and her eyes were dull with exhaustion. But when she saw Ethan and Claire, a flicker of recognition and gratitude lit up her face. Ethan rushed to her side, kneeling beside her. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice trembling. Leora nodded weakly, managing a faint smile. Their guide approached, removing the cuffs with a wave of its hand. As the restraints fell away, Leora's strength began to return, her glow brightening slightly. The leader watched this exchange silently before addressing their guide once more. After a brief conversation, the guide turned to Ethan and Claire. "You will leave now," it said, using halting but understandable English. "This is no place for you." Ethan shook his head firmly. "Not without her." Leora placed a hand on his shoulder, shaking her head gently. She pointed to herself, then to the leader, mimicking submission. It was clear she intended to stay to face whatever consequences awaited her. Ethan wanted to argue, to fight for her freedom, but he knew it wasn't his decision to make. This was her world, her people. All he could do was trust that she knew best. Reluctantly, Ethan and Claire followed their guide back to the smaller ship. As they boarded, Leora approached them one last time. She pressed a glowing crystal into Ethan's palm, her touch warm and comforting. Then she whispered something in her melodic tongue, her eyes filled with emotion. Though the words were incomprehensible, their meaning was clear. Thank you. As the ship ascended, leaving the massive vessel behind, Ethan clutched the crystal tightly, feeling its warmth seep into his skin. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes, but he blinked them away. Beside him, Claire stared out the window, her expression thoughtful. What happens now? She asked quietly. I don't know, Ethan replied, his voice thick with emotion. But I think we've done all we can. When they returned to Earth, the forest around the cabin looked the same as it always had. Yet everything felt different. Ethan and Claire went about their lives, trying to adjust to the ordinary after experiencing the extraordinary. But every night, Ethan would sit by the lake, holding the crystal Leora had given him. He would look up at the stars, searching for any sign of her. Weeks turned into months, and just as life began to feel normal again, something changed. One evening, as Ethan stargazed, a familiar beam of light descended from the sky. His heart leapt as a small ship landed in the clearing, its doors opening to reveal a figure bathed in starlight. It was Lior. A dot she stepped out, her glow brighter than ever, her violet eyes shining with joy. Without hesitation, Ethan ran to her, embracing her tightly. Behind her stood several beings, their presence peaceful and welcoming. They had come not just for her, but for them. And as Ethan gazed at the stars once more, he realized their story was far from over. Somewhere among those distant lights lay infinite possibilities and a bond that transcended worlds.